Left Behind, chapter 22, on page 403. The very first book of the Left Behind series, Left Behind. Let's continue. I gave him such a hard time at first that he backed off on me, and now that he had the knowledge and the real need to convince me, he was afraid to come right at me. He wanted to get it indirectly. He wanted me to get it indirectly, and I did. I didn't hear how he started because Hadi and I were in the ladies' room, but I had probably heard that before. When I got back, I was transfixed. It wasn't that I was hearing anything new. It was new to me when I heard it from Bruce Barnes and saw that videotape, but my dad showed such urgency and confidence. Buck, there's no other explanation for those two guys in Jerusalem, is there? Except that they have to be the two witnesses talked about in the Bible? Buck nodded. So, Dad and God were getting to me, but I wasn't ready yet. I was crying because I love him so much and because it's true. It's all true, Buck. Do you know that? I think I do, Chloe. But still I couldn't talk to my dad about it. I didn't know what was in my way. I've always been so blasted independent. I knew he was frustrated with me, maybe disappointed, and all I could do was cry. I had to think, to try to pray, to sort it out. Hadi was no help. She doesn't get it, and maybe never will. All she cared about was trivial stuff like trying to matchmake you and me. Buck smiled and tried to look insulted. That's trivial? Well, compared to what we're talking about right now, I have to say so. Gotta give you that one, Buck said. She laughed. So I knew something was wrong with Dad because I talked to you for only, 3 minutes or so before I went up? Less than that, probably. By the time I got to our suite, he was already in bed. So I told him good night, just to make sure he was still talking to me. He was. And then I tossed and turned, not ready to take the last step, crying about my dad's worrying so much about me and loving me so much. That's while it was up, probably, Buck said. But, Chloe said, this is out of character for me. Even though I'm there, I'm right there. You follow me? Buck nodded. I've been going through the same thing. I've been convinced, she said, but I'm still fighting. I'm supposed to be an intellectual. I have critical friends to answer to. Who's going to believe this? Who's going to think I haven't lost my mind? Believe me, I understand, Buck said, amazed at the similarities between their journeys. So I was stuck, she said. I wasn't getting anywhere. I tried to encourage my dad by not being so distant, but I could tell he saw me suffering. But I don't think he had any idea how close I was. I got on this plane, desperate for some closure. Pardon the psychobabble. I started wondering if God answers your prayers before you're, before you're actually a born-again Christian, Buck offered. Exactly. I don't know why that's so hard for me to say. Maybe somebody who knows better can tell me for sure, but I prayed and I think God answered. Tell me this, Buck. Just with your cognitive reasoning skills. If there is a God, and this is all true, wouldn't you want us to know? God wouldn't make it hard to learn, and he wouldn't, or I should say he couldn't, ignore desperate prayer, could he? I don't see how he could, no. Well, that's what I think. So I think it was a good test, a reasonable one, and that I wasn't out of line. I'm convinced God answered, and I was the answer, and you were the answer. Chloe, what exactly did you pray for? Oh, well, the prayer itself wasn't that big of a deal until it was answered. I just told God I needed a little more. I felt bad that all the stuff I'd heard and all that I knew from my dad wasn't enough. I just prayed really sincerely and said I would appreciate it if God could show me personally that he cared, that he knew what I was going through, and that he wanted me to know he was there. Buck felt a strange emotion, that if he tried to speak, his voice would be husky, and he might be unable to finish a sentence. He pressed his hand over his mouth to compose himself. Chloe stared at him. And you feel I was the answer to that prayer, he said at last? No doubt in my mind. See, like I said, I wouldn't even have conceived of praying that you would wind up next to me on the biggest day of my life. I wasn't even sure I'd ever see you again. But it's as if God knew better than I did that there was no one I would rather see today than you. Buck was touched, moved beyond expression. He had wanted to see her too. Otherwise, he could have flown on Hadi's flight or any of one of a dozen that would have gone to Chicago that morning. Buck just looked at her. So, what are you going to do now, Chloe? It seems to me that God has called your bluff. It wasn't a bluff, exactly, but you asked and he delivered. Sounds like you're obligated. I have no choice, she agreed. Not that I want one. From what I gathered from Bruce Barnes and the tape on Dad, you don't have to have somebody lead you through this, and you don't have to be in a church or anything. Just like I prayed for a clearer sign, I can pray about this. Your dad made that clear last night. You want to join me, she asked. Buck hesitated. Don't take this personally, Chloe, but I'm not ready. What more do you need? Oh, I'm sorry, Buck. I'm doing just what my dad did the day he became a Christian. He could hardly help himself, and I was so awful to him. But if you're not ready, you're not ready. I won't need to be forced, Buck said. Like you, I feel like I'm ready right on the doorstep. But I'm pretty careful, and I want to talk to this Barnes guy today. I have to tell you, though, my remaining doubts can hardly stand up to what's happening to you. You know, Buck, Chloe said, I promise this will be the last thing I say about it, but I'm thinking the same way my dad did. I have this urge to tell you not to wait too long because you never know what might happen. I hear you, he said. I'm going to have to take my chances this plane won't go down. I hear you, he said. I'm going to have to take my chances this plane won't go down because I still feel I need to talk to Barnes, but you have a point. Chloe turned and looked over her shoulder. There are 2 vacant seats right there, she said. She stopped a passing attendant. Can I give you a message for my dad? Sure. Is he captain or first officer? Captain. Please just tell him his daughter has extremely good news for him. Extremely good news, the attendant repeated. Rayford was manually flying the plane as a diversion when a senior flight attendant gave him the message. He had no idea what it meant, but it was so unlike Chloe to initiate communication lately, but he was intrigued. But it was so unlike Chloe to initiate communication lately, he was intrigued. He asked his first officer to take over. Rayford unstrapped himself and made his way out, surprised to see Cameron Williams. He hoped Williams wasn't the extent of Chloe's good news. Pleasant as it was to think the man might already be making good on his promise to look up Bruce Barnes, Rayford also hoped that Chloe wasn't about to announce some ill-advised whirlwind romance in the bud. He shook his hands with the writer and expressed his pleasant but wary surprise. Chloe reached for his neck with both hands and gently pulled him down to where she could whisper to him, Daddy, could you and I sit back there for a couple of minutes so I can talk to you? Buck sensed disappointment in Captain Steele's eyes at first. He looked forward to telling the pilot why he was glad to be flying to Chicago. Sitting next to Chloe had been only a bonus. He peeked back at Steele with his daughter, engaged in intense conversation and then praying together. Buck wondered if there was any airline regulation against that. Then he peeked back at Steele with his daughter, engaged in intense conversation and then praying together. Buck wondered if there was any airline regulation against that. He knew Rayford couldn't fraternize for long. In a few minutes, Chloe stepped into the aisle, and Rayford stood and embraced her. They both appeared overcome with emotion. A middle-aged couple across the aisle leaned down and stared, brows raised. The captain noticed, straightened, and headed toward the cockpit. My daughter, he said awkwardly, pointing to Chloe, who had smiled through her tears. She's my daughter. The couple looked at each other, and the woman spoke. Right. And I'm the Queen of England, she said, and Buck laughed out loud. Okay, so it's chapter 22 of Left Behind, the first book of the Pine series, Left Behind. Here's the book. Take care, everybody. I know the video from my Storytime channel. Take care, everyone.